Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'd like to welcome you to our third sponsored live stream event in partnership with the AFP Foundation for Philanthropy Canada and AFP Toronto Congress. My name is Scott Dexheimer. I'm the president and CEO of Vitreo Group, a fundraising consulting company whose mantra is to offer a clear approach in an industry that's often overwhelming and overcomplicated. In addition to our recent blogs led by Andrea McManus, one of our partners, we're really happy to be building on a national conversation for important topics. We're pleased to offer that further exploration today. Fundraising, feminism, and disruption, stories, conversations, and creating true change together, hosted by this excellent panel who will introduce themselves. For the information of those on the live stream, this transmitted version will be about 45 minutes of stream for education. If you have questions, please click the question mark and type them into the comment area, and we'll pass those on to the panel, and they will answer them as they're available to do so. During the conversation and following, please keep the conversation going at #MisruptDisrupt. And now, on the panel, I'm going to pass it over to Beth.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And just so you know, we are disrupting a little bit. Feminism is my second favorite F word. The first one being fundraising, just to be clear. But I've got these amazing women. I'm Beth Locke. I'm the Chief Development Officer at BC Women's Hospital and Health Center Foundation.
I'm Jen Love. I'm a partner at Agents of Good.
I'm Mimosa Kabir, and I'm at the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research.
And my name is very Scandinavian and difficult. It's Beate Sørum, but you are all free to just call me B. And I've come from Oslo this morning. Not this morning, this week. Yes.
So thank you all for being bold and starting with us and wanting to disrupt what's going on. So I wanted to start, though, with a territorial acknowledgement. Unless there's somebody here that feels more suited than I am an immigrant, I'm not from here. Is there anybody else that would rather do that or feels better equipped? So let me just start with that. We acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse nations, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13. And we settlers, immigrants, and visitors are fortunate to live, play, work, and visit here. So thank you.
So here's how today is going to work. We are going to do about, as Scott said, about 45 minutes or a little bit longer live here in Toronto, and we want to acknowledge a couple of people who are here who are live tweeting on our behalf. We've got Cindy and Steph and Claire and a couple of others who are going to be sharing as much as they can using the MisruptDisrupts hashtag and also partially from the Misrupt Now Twitter account. And we also have some people joining us from all over the world, including Rory Green and Simone Joya and Tanya Little and others, who are a big part of our collective of feminists who are standing together to talk about all things feminism and fundraising. Some of you have probably seen our Misrupt Now pins, and Misrupt is really a community of people who are standing together to talk about all things feminist and fundraising. So if you see someone wearing a Misrupt Now pin, it means that we are open to hearing your stories. We're here to talk about your experiences. We're here to share in whatever way you want to lean into feminist and fundraising conversations. And we want to acknowledge everyone who has come forward and has stepped forward to be part of these courageous conversations. They're really important, and that's why we're having them. What's next? Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot. Then after the first part of the session, there's going to be after the webcast is over, we're going to have a closed space. We're going to turn off all of our, the webcast is going to go off, and we're going to also have adjusted social media rules. But we are hoping that for the first chunk of the session, please feel free to tweet and share and broaden this conversation as much as we can so that as many people as possible can hear it.
Okay. So what is feminism? At its core, feminism is about defining, establishing, and achieving an equality of the sexes. But for us, that's not enough. We want to live in a world where every person, and we mean every single person, is treated with respect, has the ability to direct their own lives, and reach their full potential. And when we say this, we mean We want this to be true for every woman, man, adult, child, Black, Asian, Latino, Indigenous, white, gay, lesbian, transgender, straight, poor, rich, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, disabled, able-bodied, immigrant, refugee, citizen, and every other group of people on this planet.
So I don't know if, did anyone attend the protests yesterday? Did anyone march for their rights, for their right to be seen and, no? No one? See, yesterday, that's a very good question. That was the point. That's kind of the whole point of the joke, because yesterday was actually International Men's Day. Yes, there is an International Men's Day, but no one ever hears about it except on International Women's Day. It's the only time of year anyone asks, well, when's International Men's Day? What about the men? What about the boys? Those questions are not being asked on International Men's Day, which I think is a pretty good symptom on that the men are sort of okay. That's not to say that there aren't issues that affect men that don't affect women, and those are important. But we will say that most of those, whether it's mental health, whether it's the tendency that boys might now actually fall behind in education, those stem from the same patriarchal structures that keep women back. These, the society that tells boys that it's not okay to have feelings, that you shouldn't talk about your feelings, you shouldn't be soft. These are the things that lead to mental health issues for grown men, and they are a part of the problem. They are not, however, solved by men's rights groups, just to put it that way. So why are we here talking about feminism at a fundraising conference?
Well, first of all, because 70% of fundraisers are female. This is based on AFP membership statistics, so that's not reflective of everyone in our sector. But it's not a secret. You can look around even at this conference and you know that our sector is predominantly women. But when you look at leadership, 4 out of 5 senior positions are held by men. So what does that tell us? It tells us that society does not value us enough. It tells us that society thinks that when we're doing the same job that someone else is, we should be paid less. And that's why we're talking about it, because it's important to address that. Sometimes we feel alone when we look at these numbers and we think that it's us. But what the statistics are showing you that it's society that's been a part of this conversation, and it's society that's told us that that's okay. So we're talking about it so we feel less alone, so that we can create a space to heal, and so that we can enact change.
The second reason why we're here talking about feminism is because it's our damn job. It's this sector's job to fix society. And if we're not talking about the issues that affect our society, how can we even expect any other sector to take this seriously? We have to be at the forefront. We have to have the moral high ground on these issues. If we don't take them seriously, that's our integrity down the drain. So this is an issue that we have to talk about. And third,
well, we're also having this conversation because it is difficult and it's awkward. And unless we're willing to talk about it, we can't create change. Our hope is that at the end of this session, you're really thinking about this more, because there are no answers. There's no canned, this is how you solve the issue of us not being equal. We hope that what we share can enable compassion, ethical thinking, and responsibility. And so today, creating a safe and open space to have these conversations is really important, and knowing that we're not there yet. So
yeah. The other thing about the importance of having the conversation is the importance of creating the space for those conversations. Because most of us work for causes that we really care about, and we work for people that we really care about. And if we're not having these conversations internally, if we're not taking the hard job of creating space for them, they will at some point explode all over the front pages of newspapers, and they will hurt the causes that we care about. So we have to have the tough discussions in advance. Now, another important affirmation when we're talking about feminism here, it's easy to reduce feminism to sort of, men versus women. But we are talking about intersectional feminism. And as Flavia Jordan said, my feminism will be intersectional or it will be bullshit. Intersectionality is the theory that you cannot talk about marginalization without looking at all the groups and how they intersect. I'm a woman, so I have some things that are making me less privileged, but I am a white woman from Norway, which are things that are making me incredibly privileged. So we have to look at the way that race intersects with gender, intersects with cultural backgrounds, class, education, sexual orientation. All of these things interact and create different grids of privilege. And one of the examples of why this is so difficult is the discussion that's come around the Women's March and the leadership there in the last couple of weeks, where they've had the management of the organization have stood up and, or they haven't denounced the conversations of Minister Louis Farrakhan at Nation of Islam, who's had quite a lot of things that have been said that are anti-Semitic, anti-LGBTQ, and the lack of them standing up and saying, I don't support this, has led to a lot of criticism, because we can't have leaders of a movement that are marginalizing other groups. They have, however, they've come out with some thoughtful responses, and they are talking about how this controversy reflects how difficult it is to build a movement that actually encapsulates all people, and how difficult it is to create a truly intersectional movement. So, the third thing that's really important to recognize when we are talking about these topics is knowing and recognizing and understanding privilege.
So we're going to do an exercise. We have a couple of volunteers who got a hold of us in advance. So volunteers who have come forward in advance, please come forward. We've got Harvey and Scott and Christine and Lindsay. Is there anybody else that would like to join this exercise? It's called a privilege walk, and I'm going to ask a series of questions. And based on how you respond to the questions, we're going to move backwards and forwards through the room. So is there anyone else who would like to join?
No, go here.
Excellent. Thank you, Teresa. Fabulous. Hannah, great. Wow, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to clump
Just
together a little bit at
bunch
the
over a
beginning.
bit.
Yeah, get
Come on.
squished
This
so
way,
you don't,
this way,
somebody
this
might
way.
walk
Okay,
into this
cool,
or that.
And as
Yeah,
soon
come
as
in,
you start,
Rebecca.
as soon as you start walking,
As soon as you start walking, there'll be more room. Wonderful. This is amazing. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to make a series of statements, and you guys respond based on your life experiences. So a couple of rules for the people involved. Listen carefully to each statement and take a step forward if this take the step required. I'll be asking you to step either forward or back. Take the step required based on if the statement applies to you. And try to be as honest as you can in your answer, but if you don't feel comfortable, you can always stand still and you don't have to move, okay? And when you're thinking about the answers to these questions, think about them in relation to your own life and also in relation to the groups of people that you identify with, okay? Everybody clear? Yes, good? Okay. So we're going to start with this one. If you see a group of people you identify with widely represented in the media, take one step forward. If your native language is not the same as the official language in your country, step back. If you were ever called names because of your background, step back. If you ever felt as though you were feared, inferior, or unwanted member of society, step back.
You can bunch up.
If your parents were professionals, doctors, lawyers, etc., take one step forward. If you ever tried to change your appearance, mannerisms, or behavior to avoid being judged or ridiculed, or to gain credibility, step back. If you're taught the culture and history of your ancestors in school, step forward. If you were raised witnessing violence, addiction to drugs or alcohol, prostitution, or crime, step back. If you ever had to skip a meal or were hungry because there was not enough money to buy you food when you were growing up, step back. If you were ever denied access to academics or jobs because of your background, step back. If you were encouraged by your parents to attend college, step forward. If you were raised in a single-parent household, step back.
Oh, wow.
If your family owned the home you grew up in, step forward. If you can show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear of or ridicule or violence, step forward. If you were ever offended by a joke or remark about people you identify with but felt unsafe to confront the situation, step back. If you felt or were told that you should work twice as hard as others to succeed in school or career because of your background, step back. If you're the first person in your family to receive a university education, step back. Yeah, you're just going to grow right there on the wall, Teresa.
Next room.
If you can access washrooms easily without worrying about finding a gender-neutral or accessible washroom, step forward. If you attended art galleries, museums, or the theater growing up, step forward. If you've ever felt judged because of the size or shape of your body, step back. If the people in power in your city or town look like you, step forward. If the holidays you get at work or school are the holidays you celebrate, step forward. So that's the end of the exercise. I want everybody just for a moment to stay where you are and look around and see where you've ended up. For the people in the exercise, first of all, thank you for the courage to step forward. Or back. Sorry, that should have been step up. Thank you. Anybody want to share a reflection? Anybody want to share how that felt or how you feel now? Yes?
This is my life. It's not surprising to me because it's always been, there's been a couple of trajectories, and I will acknowledge my privilege and where I am in my life, but like in the society and system that I live and work in, I've never advanced that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? I saw a few heads nodding. Harvey. Yeah, we're just going to run the mic over.
Well, I'm quite conscious of all the privileges I have, which is why I'm committed to social change. So I think that's why I'm in the sector, and I know that's why a lot of other people are in the sector. So I think this is a really good exercise, and especially for men, if you're here or watching it, you should not be defensive. You should engage in the conversation.
And I asked Harvey yesterday, I kind of hijacked him in the hallway because I said, and I know that Harvey works in social justice and social change and has for his entire career, and I asked him to participate because I knew that he would have the perspective to understand why we'd asked him. So I appreciate that. That took a lot of courage. Yes, Steph.
I have a comment.
Oh, wait a second. There's a...
I just have a comment from Twitter, which is that this is a great opportunity to think about the ableism inherent in this activity.
Yes.
Physically.
And in fact, that's a really good point. Thank you, person from the Twitterverse, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. There are a number of different versions of this. And so there's a great BuzzFeed video, which is the original version, which is where I was introduced to it by Simone Joyeux. And when you first watch it, you realize that it is very focused on young people in America. So the adapted questions that we chose were based on a Canadian experience, but you can do different exercises based on ability, based on different kinds of exercises. So depending on your organization, you may actually want to do one that's about ability and ability access to demonstrate that point to you and your communities. And I think for the people, anyone else have a reflection? Yes, Sarah.
I think to contextualize, this is not okay. I think to contextualize this activity, and I've done this activity with a number of different groups and trainings. If you did a cross-section of our positions in the sector, our level of seniority, and especially our wages or our income, it would almost certainly look exactly the same, where, older white, particularly men and cisgendered, heterosexual, et cetera, men are getting paid much, much more significantly than anybody that I know or looks like me.
And that's a really good point, Sarah, and we're going to get into that a little bit later. So again, thank you everyone for stepping up. We really appreciate that. It took a lot of courage. And for those of you in the room and for those of you at home, take a moment to think about where you might have ended up. I had a few women at the beginning of this session, a few women of color who said, I know where I'm going to end up in this one. So just think about that and think about it in relation to the various questions. Here's another story that illustrates the idea of privilege and bias. And Our fierce friend Rory Green shared this story when we were together in Dublin a number of years ago. And it's the story of the salmon and the trout. And the story was originally told by Fiona McFarlane, who's a managing partner in one of Vancouver's largest and most successful financial services company, and actually the only one with a woman as a managing partner. And she says that being a woman trying to thrive and survive in a man's world is like being a freshwater trout trying to swim with ocean-going salmon. So for those of us who are biologists and those of us who live in certain parts of Canada, that will make a lot of sense. I'll just take one extra second to explain that. Salmon can swim in both freshwater and ocean water, but trout can only swim in freshwater. So if the salmon and the trout are swimming, then the salmon can't see or sense the salt in the water and turns to the trout and says, "What's the matter with you? Swim faster, try harder, keep up with me." But no matter how hard the trout swims, no matter how fast the trout swims, the trout can never swim as fast as the salmon. And the salmon would never know that. So the point of the story is that it's actually not the trout's responsibility to work harder or try harder. It's the responsibility of the salmon and the trout to work together to desalinate the water.
So part of the exercise that we just did with the privilege walk is really about recognizing and owning your privilege. It's not an exercise to pass blame. It's not about apologizing for the privilege that you do have. It's about recognizing that others might walk through the world with experiences that you know nothing of and being cognizant of that. And there's an excellent essay by Roxane Gay. We'll be handing out a resource sheet after this. The essay's on there, where she talks about the peculiar benefits of privilege. And part of that is about recognizing that all of us have something that someone else doesn't. All of us might be without something that someone else has. And she uses President Barack Obama as an example, because as a former president of the United States, he experienced privileges that some of us may never dream of. But as the first Black president, he also faced barriers that his predecessors didn't. And that is part of the conversation about privilege. So it's not a scale where you're kind of comparing. It's not the oppression Olympics. It's really about recognizing where you have privilege, and later we'll talk about how you can use that privilege to benefit others.
How are we doing? Maybe we need to take a little breath. We've got a lot of information that's come at us, right? So that's why I'm going to start talking about the state of equality. So actually, I don't want to talk about the state of equality, because I actually believe that we need to celebrate the differences that we all have. When I look at these women and myself, we're all fundraisers. There's a thing that we connect with. We actually represent different decades of life. And some of us are immigrants. Some of us are visitors to this country. And some of us were born, have a couple generations under our belts. Instead, what I'd like to talk about, is the state of equity. Okay, we'll just quickly go through that. So equality, just to be clear, and this is a great little graphic that I know Jen and her team worked on. You might have seen it before. So it's looking at social justice. So the first image, you can see it's about equality, where everybody gets the same thing. So they're all standing on the same little box, but that doesn't actually help. It still doesn't help the people that have the less ability or the less needs. Their view is still blocked, so they still have the barriers up there for them. The next thing you'll see is equity. So equity looks a little better, does it not? This is sometimes what we know as affirmative action. It raises up some people more. It keeps the people that already could see at the ability to see. However, you'll see that the barrier still exists. The barrier's the fence. Instead, we want to move into the space, and this is why we're having these discussions, why we're trying to disrupt the silence around this. We're really trying to move into a space of justice. In justice, the systemic barriers are removed. That can be systemic racism, it can be different kinds of oppression, it can be who's had the job longer, who looks like the kind of people we're asking money from. That's what we want to overcome. So instead, I want to talk about the state of equity. What matters for equity is that we recognize that you and you and you are all unique individuals with things that I can learn from, that I can cherish, that I can enjoy as people, and not expect that everybody needs to be like me, or maybe even just like Jen or Mim, right? You want to, and it's funny, we do this all the time, I think, with our donors. I adapt myself to make it more comfortable for the donor. I have absolutely zero problem doing that. But when it maybe comes to colleagues or other people in my life, I may not feel as adaptable. But when we talk about equality, and we're going to talk about different things here, I want you to start thinking about not equality, but equity. And for me, one of those big things is language matters. I think language matters so much in our profession. I cannot take it, if you've heard me before, about people talking about my donors. No, you don't own anybody. Different things we use, sort of, Elizabeth Dale was talking about these kind of war metaphors we have in our profession, targeting prospects, running a campaign, and even the difference between talking about making an ask and soliciting. Because soliciting has a very specific word that's used in different parts of what we're doing. So I loved that, and I'm all for that. So Jen's going to move it from actual...
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a couple of the statistics and what we know about the gender wage gap here in Canada. So these are Canadian statistics, and this is based on... so this one is based on... The dollar sign is always based on Canadian men. So for... Canadian women make 75 cents on the dollar compared to Canadian men. But even that is not even the whole part of the story. If you are a newcomer woman to Canada, then you make 71 cents on the dollar compared to a Canadian man. If you are a racialized woman, you make 67 cents on the dollar compared to a Canadian man. If you are an Indigenous woman, then you make 65 cents on the dollar compared to a Canadian man. And if you are a woman with a disability, then you make 54 cents on the dollar of a Canadian man.
This is why it's so important that when we talk about this, we remember again that intersectionality. Because if we are just talking about a Canadian woman makes 75 cents on the dollar, clearly that is not the whole picture. We have to take all of these other things into account as well. Someone's doing group work on the other side of the wall. What we often are told when we hear this statistic is that women choose these jobs. Women choose the lower paying jobs. Well, if you didn't want low pay, why did you work in healthcare? You should have just, or why did you become a nurse? You should have become a doctor. And there is so much proof now that this is not the whole picture. It explains some of the discrepancy, but not all of it. And it's always, what we've seen is that this changes as women take over different sectors as well. It's true all over the board. And it's not true that if women just chose higher paying jobs, they would be getting the same pay as men. If we look at the top 10% of earners, the highest paid women still earn 37% less than the 10% highest earning men. This is Ontario numbers. And this is true even as women are getting more degrees than men. They are higher educated. They have pretty much the same work experience. They have the same education. It's true for all levels of income except for the very, very lowest. And if we look at some numbers from our own sector, this is from Elizabeth Dale's article, Fundraising as Women's Work. A female CEO will make $20,000 roughly less than a male CEO in our sector. A female CDO will make $23,000 less than a male CDO, and a female program manager will make $10,000 less than a male program manager. This is truth. And if we look at skill sets as well, we value the skill sets that women have less than the skill sets of traditional men's jobs. If you compare jobs that have a similar length of education, similar types of skill sets like IT and HR, they should ideally have the same kind of wages. But one is dominated by men, one is dominated by women, and the difference comes out to a 27% difference in the wages. A couple of years ago, I met a woman at the airport in Chicago, and she was about to retire. She was a court stenographer, and she told me how when she started her job many years ago, it was primarily a man's job. Most court stenographers were men, and it was a high-paying job that you could train for, which she did. But over the years, as more and more women saw this is a high-paying job that I could get, I'm going to go for it, and they moved into that sector, she found that it was more and more no longer regarded as a high-skilled job. It became secretarial work, and it became lower wage work. So the young women who now become court stenographers can only dream of the salary level that this woman that I met had. We see this over and over. As women take over male-dominated fields, the pay and the status of that job drops. It's true for, there's substantial evidence that this is true. Some of the examples is people who work in parks or leading camps. That went from a primarily male-dominated field to a now primarily female-dominated field in the last 50 years. The median hourly wage dropped by 57% in that time. Ticket agent, 43%. Biologist, 18% drop. And you've got the opposite end of the scale. If you're looking at computer work, computer programming, that used to be traditional women's work. Women were the people who were programming the computers. But at some point, the businesses that wanted to sell computers made it into a boys' thing. And then the boys moved into the computer industry, and what happened? Well, the wages rised, and the status rised as well. So it's not as easy as women should just choose higher paying jobs. When they do, those jobs become lower paying jobs, and we have to recognize this, and we have to talk about this in our own workplaces as well.
But it doesn't stop there. Yay.
No, we still got some rabbit holes to go down.
Again, I feel like I should have everybody take a breath and relax. We're giving lots of information. But there's another place where sometimes it's women, but somebody in the office is doing more, and that's emotional labor. So what is emotional labor? Emotional labor is when we have to adjust how we feel, how we act, how we respond, either because it's a customer, a donor, something like that, that we want to manage their feelings as the person speaking to them. Or it can be something happening within the office. That is, this person is talking angrily to me, but I don't feel like I can stand up and say the kind of things I might to my friend. This is emotional labor that we do. It happens a lot. How many people have had a mom in the office? Or somebody who called the mom? Maybe you worked with your mom. I don't know. Okay, so a lot of people relate to this. So a mom in the office is somebody that's doing that kind of emotional labor. But in case you're not quite getting that, I do have another little story. I think a lot of us maybe can relate to this. That's when your mother's sister, I'll call her Aunt Bernadette, your mother's sister gives you this present that you really want to reduce, reuse, and recycle in some way. But you need to, in the moment, say, "Thank you, Aunt Bernadette. That was so lovely. I can't wait to use this." You are managing your own response to make Aunt Bernadette happy, possibly to make your mother happy, possibly to make sure that you look like an appreciative child / niece. This is what emotional labor is. It's that kind of management. And we shouldn't have to do that without some sort of compensation.
So there are primarily, we could look at like 3 kinds of emotional labor. You've got the emotional labor of the home, of the work, and of the emotions, I guess. And as I said, I come from Norway. We are a country that is considered the country with the highest level of equality in the world. And if you ask Norwegian men, they will say that they do share half the housework. If you ask Norwegian women, they will not quite agree. And that has a lot to do with emotional labor. If you look at the actual share of hours spent on housework in the home, they are actually quite equal now. It's not really because the men are doing that much more. It is primarily because the women are doing that much less, which I imagine has a lot to do with the invention of the washing machine and, pre-made dinners and maybe having someone come clean your home instead of doing it yourself. But the share of physical labor in the home is near equal in Norway. These are Norwegian numbers. The thing that's not equally shared is the task of project managing the home. That's also emotional labor, and it primarily falls to women. It's stuff like making sure there's food in the fridge. Who always knows what's in the fridge and makes sure that makes a mental note to plan what we're going to have for dinner tomorrow and making sure that there's something in the fridge or that we take it out of the freezer so it thaws in time. It's stuff like knowing if the kids need new winter shoes. Who notices when the shoes are too small and makes a plan to go to the mall to get some new ones, preferably while they're on sale? Who knows and makes sure that all of the Christmas presents are bought and or made and wrapped and delivered in a timely fashion for both sides of the family? Who does that? Who knows when the kids are invited to a birthday party and makes sure they have clean clothes to go there in, a ride to get there and get back, and a present to bring to the kid whose birthday it is? Who knows all of the kids' activities and organizes their day around that? And who's buying the presents for Mother's Day, again, on both sides, of the family? Usually, for most women I know, they are the ones buying gifts for their husband's mother. And I know that that is very cis and heteronormative, but it's, yes. That's emotional labor. And we do that in the home, but it's also true for the workplace. There is a lot of emotional labor that goes on in the workplace as well, which is sort of a second project management position you have on top of the paid work that you're already doing. And it is exhausting. And it's been speculated that it explains a lot of why women have higher levels of sick leave than men, because we are constantly exhausted because we do all of this emotional labor on top of the physical tasks that we do. In the workplace, it's stuff like organizing the Christmas party. It's stuff like remembering that Bernadette turns 50 next month and make sure we have a collection at the work so that we can buy her something nice and write a birthday card. It's stuff that, knowing that we'll be in a full-day meeting and there needs to be some snacks, or Jen is going to be absolutely horrible to deal with. Who knows that? Who knows when someone's not doing all right and makes sure to ask them, hey, are you okay? Do you need to talk about something? Should we go sit down and have a conversation? Who are the ones that listen to people's personal problems? Now, it's not always women, and it's not only women, but more often than not, this is work that falls to women. And it's often not recognized or rewarded.
So what I want to talk about on the emotional labor front is how many here are managing other people? One person, 100 people? Okay. So that work of emotional labor is actually work. It's work we do. And I'll just share a quick example from my old job. I'm in my new job 6 weeks now. This is my 6th week. In my old job, and I love making people feel great. That's a natural state I like to be in. But we had a lot of change over the last 2 years, and it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, unsettled, especially people who haven't had a lot of jobs or they're new to the fundraising sector. So in that job, I was sort of, checking in with people at different levels because I can see that. I was part of the attempt at retention. We lost 75% of our fundraisers over a year and a half. And then I came to my new job. And my first senior leadership team meeting, they were talking about, there was some, grumbling in the staff, and the CEO was going to address it. And she gave this really inspirational talk. It was amazing. And I noticed all my people were happy. It was crazy. I'd never felt like that before. And I realized how much emotional labor I'd done in my old job, and how at this job that I am now, I come in every day and I think about fundraising, and it's all I think about. And it's so freeing, I'll tell you that. So if you're thinking about who you manage, think about how are you going to reward that, or if you're not going to reward it, then removing that burden from people. So one of the things we talked about was sharing the load. So you can make organizing the birthday cards, organizing the staff picnic part of someone's job, but then make sure they're compensated for that. Recognize what's happening with that. You could create or demand compensation. If it's you that's doing that, why not talk to your supervisor or the CEO or whatever you've got going about how can I make that? I'm doing it. I want that to be part of my job, and I want that to be part of my evaluative measure so that I can get better compensation. Or think about insisting that we rotate the work. So here's 12 people every month. We're going to draw your names out of the hat. That's who's going to figure out the birthdays for that month, the cake, everything else. Or you can, when there are certain jobs like that aren't related to somebody, taking notes in a meeting, for instance, circulate that. Don't let it fall to the person who doesn't have the guts to say, I don't want to do that. And now we're going to get into the tough topic. So I think all this this kind of work we do and the fact that we sometimes can pick on people who don't feel they can stand up for what they want to do is a real issue. So about a year and a half ago, sexual harassment has been on my mind quite a while. I had a pretty egregious incident in my job a long time ago, but I've been talking about it more since 2014. And in the summer of 2016, I put out a little non-scientific, nothing to do with anything academic, survey asking people to share their experiences of sexual harassment, harassment, and bullying. And I took that information and did a sort of blog post, and then AFP, I spoke with some of the leadership at AFP, and we, Chris and I wrote an article that was in Advancing Philanthropy, and that happened to come out sort of 2 weeks before the Harvey Weinstein stuff broke. And I think sexual harassment is terrible. It's about power. I think a lot of things we do in our sector play on some of the gender things. You know, there's sort of young, friendly, bopping people in special events. They don't always make a lot of money and don't have a lot of power. But the part of that survey that I had a hard time accessing was the part about bullying. It was really hard because I think although sexual harassment is absolutely difficult, we do have some laws in place. But these are Canadian statistics. 40% of Canadian workers experience bullying on a weekly basis. And I feel like this should absolutely not be tolerated at one bit in this profession. We often skimp on things like HR. We don't have professionals. We have somebody from finance handling that. It's absolutely not right. And when I read some of the survey responses, for me it was really heartbreaking because unlike the sexual harassment, and this wasn't a comprehensive survey, AFP, thank God, did one with the Chronicle of Philanthropy much later. But in that, 4 people told me that they'd tried to commit suicide. So I'm going to share a couple of those responses, and I want to think about this. It made me doubt my worth and the value that I brought to the organization. And don't we have such a bunch of creative, exciting, mission-driven people? The value I brought to the organization and the fundraising profession. I was convinced that I was so broken that I had nothing to offer. Before, I was an outspoken advocate for those with mental illness, but now I'm scared to use my voice. This person, I work remotely as much as possible. She's still in the job. I vomit nearly every night when I think about having to go to work the next day. I tried to take my life in January of 2017. I'm stuck at that job due to insurance needs. And if anybody here is American, you know how real that is for some people. I was fired for speaking out and left the sector. And I can't tell you, there were quite a few people that either left the town or city they were living in or definitely left the sector. It was too much. I'd really like us to think about what bullying is, how it comes about, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. We can't dive into it because we've got so much we want to talk about, and especially with our guest. But I do want to just leave this from the Chronicle of Philanthropy and AFP and the survey that they did together, which I'm very, very grateful for. 1 in 4 women fundraisers has faced sexual harassment on the job. This may be from colleagues. It may be from donors. And this happens to men too. So 7% of men. This is a power play. It's that simple. We hear it a lot more from women, but people keep it quiet. I wanted to bring it out from behind the closed doors of offices, the sinks at events in the women's restroom where we told who to stay away from. So I'm hoping that if you're a manager, you're starting to take a look and do the emotional labor to understand who's uncomfortable, who doesn't want to be coming to work, figure out what's underneath that.
And we will be addressing sexual harassment a little bit more later with our guest when we're done with the webcast. So there is a Norwegian professor and feminist whose name is Beate, and she, in the 70s, she defined these 5 master suppression techniques. These are a huge part of Scandinavian academic talk about feminism and about the workplace, and in the public debate as well. They are widely recognized and used, and I think they are quite useful for you guys as well to know, to recognize, and we're going to give you some techniques of how to deal with these. Because this is a lot of the stuff that happens on a daily basis that isn't necessarily quite harassment. It's not quite bullying. It's not quite as bad as that. Sometimes you can't really put your finger on it, but it 100% affects most of us at some stage, and I think you will be recognizing these as you hear them. Massive suppression techniques or domination techniques are really strategies of social manipulation, and it's done by people in power to keep that power. And it's done to disadvantaged groups to keep them sort of in their place. So the first one is about making someone invisible. It is about silencing or marginalizing persons who are in opposition by ignoring them. This might be the big meeting that you have at the office where everyone's talking and you're not asked about your opinion. It might be actually raising your hand, starting to talk, and then have someone start talking over you. It might be actually getting to speak. You say your piece, and then everyone just moves on. No one discusses your suggestion. The conversation just goes on as if you had never said anything in the first place. And it might even be coming up with an idea only to have another colleague say that same idea 2 minutes later and actually get credit for it. These are all techniques of making someone invisible, and they are very harmful in the workplace. The second technique that someone in power might use is ridicule. So this could be you coming home from this conference and saying, look, I attended this session about feminism and fundraising, and I think we've got some problems in our workplace, and I want to address them. And going, oh, yeah, you were in there with all the feminazis, right? That's ridiculing. That minimizes your experience. It minimizes the things that you have to say, and it makes it that much harder for you to step forward the next time. Third technique is about withholding information. So this, especially if you're the only woman at the office, or you're the only woman of a management group, and all the other guys, they go out for a beer, or they go golfing, and you're not invited. And when you get back, suddenly they have made strategies, and they've made decisions. And you come back, and you don't know, when did this happen? When did we decide this? You weren't given the information. Or someone strategically chooses to withhold a key piece of information to make you make the wrong decisions, make you look stupid in front of other managers when you come up with your conclusions. They are, on purpose, making you less able to make an informed decision. The fourth is the double bind. It's the damned if you do and damned if you don't. It is saying to your team that, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that meeting after hours because I have to pick up my kids. And then being blamed for not focusing on your career, not taking your career seriously. And then when you do the opposite, when you say, yes, I can do that meeting after work, and you call someone else, you call your mother to say, hey, can you pick up the kids for me because I have to have a late work meeting? You're told that you're a bad mom. You're told that you're sacrificing your family over your kids. You can't win. And these kinds of situations, they are done deliberately to you. You're punished no matter how you act. The fifth technique is the blame and the shame. It is the insinuating that you yourself are to blame for the situation that you're in. This is all your fault. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you report it? Why didn't you speak out? Why didn't you go to the police? This is your fault. It's about embarrassing someone or insinuating that they are to blame for this position. These are incredibly harmful techniques that are used by people in power. They might not necessarily know that that's what they're doing, but they have internalized these ways of keeping other people down. And there's two more techniques that have been added in later years that are certainly very relevant to the world we live in right now, which is objectifying, and it is the threat of physical violence. Luckily, there are techniques that you can actually use to counter these techniques when you learn how to recognize them.
So I'm just going to go through these a little quickly, but I believe in having sort of something to say and do in your back pocket so that you're not surprised when these things come up. So when they're telling you to be invisible or making you invisible, you need to take up space. So you're going to say something like, don't be a victim, know what's going to happen, don't show anger and frustration, but loudly claim your space. You can say something like, I can tell you're not focusing on my presentation right now. For ridicule, question it. Don't assume that that's the normative. For withholding information, say you want the cards on the table. How did that decision get made? You could say, why wasn't I there? You can say, can we talk about it now that a decision's been made so I understand it more? For the double bind, you need to break that pattern. And for the blame and shame, you need to kind of call it out and intellectualize it. In that case, is that my fault? You need to think, don't fall into the assumptions. And then with this, we also have confirmation techniques that you can use. I'm not going to go all the way through it because I know we're kind of running out of time for our other guests. And Mimosa has some super important stuff to talk about with allyship.
So I'm going to take it one step back. When we were discussing intersectionality, which is the recognition that we can't be truly equal unless we're addressing a bunch of different issues at the same time. Can we do it all at once? Probably not. But it's about recognizing that different women might be going through different experiences and feeling oppressed in different ways, and for the men in the room on how to be an ally to women in general. So when we're talking about allyship, the important things to remember is you can't just consider yourself an ally. Your efforts have to be recognized by those that you're trying to support. It's about using your privilege to support others. And it's a long process. It's about building and maintaining a relationship of trust, being willing to question your experiences, unlearn things that you might already know, and reevaluate.
Me? Ooh. So when you are trying to be an ally, you will make mistakes. You will inevitably make mistakes. That is okay. And in fact, the group of us who have been talking about this for months now, trying to create this session, made a huge mistake just 2 days ago, where Jen volunteered to own the mistake. She tweeted, "Women and those who identify as women here at AFP Congress 2018, we are wearing Misrupt Now pins to have conversations about feminism and fundraising. We're here to listen to your stories and experiences." There's a big mistake in here, right? Some people recognize it. And someone tweeted at us, Liz, are you here? Yes? Do you want to talk about what was wrong with this? Someone's running a mic to you.
Yep, coming with a mic. Sorry, Laura, we should have told you that a little bit earlier.
At least I know who Liz is.
So the problem with that is that it creates a divide between cisgendered women, which are women who identify the gender that they were designated at birth, and trans or non-binary or genderqueer women who are all women. It's a matter of everyone who identifies as a woman, rather than women, which is some nebulous group that doesn't exist, and people who identify as such.
Yes.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Liz, for pointing it out, as she did on Twitter. Gave us a heads up, this is wrong, which it is. And as you do when you do something wrong, you know, Jen apologized. Thank Liz for her work in pointing this out, because that is also emotional labor that falls to other people about pointing out the mistakes that someone trying to be an ally makes. And you do want to thank someone for actually doing that labor for you, because Jen hadn't educated herself in this instance.
And the thing is, so the reason why, and I just messaged Liz an hour ago on Twitter asking if we could use this example, because I'm the person giving this presentation, and of all the people who should be knowledgeable about some of these issues, you could say that I would be one of those people. And yet, I made the mistake, wasn't clear, and I indicated to Liz, I thanked her for what she did, and was open to learn. So yep. It was a good lesson for me, and I really appreciate it.
And really, it's no more difficult than that. When you do step in it, and inevitably you will, just apologize. It's as simple as that. Own the mistake and apologize. Don't try to explain it away, just own the mistake.
Okay. Also equally important is to not assume anything. Asking questions is really key. Sometimes we assume that we're knowledgeable about a topic, but different people have different feelings about the topic. So you're not going to know that unless you're willing to ask questions. And, you know, in certain situations, again, you might have privilege that someone else does not, and they might where you do not. So in asking the questions, you're able to go through that. We've also identified ways that we can be allies. There are certain different ways. So the first one is standing behind someone. And this is providing support. This is willing to be willing to not only ask questions, but be willing to listen. It's also in a situation where you might be in a meeting and someone's asking a question and no one's paying attention. It could be up to you to say, hey, I think so-and-so has a question. You're not speaking for them, but you're giving them a stage to speak on from behind. There's also standing with, and this is a bit of an exercise in emotional intelligence. There are certain situations, and I think as fundraisers, we tend to consider ourselves empathetic, where you want to share your stories with somebody else, to let them know that they're not alone, to let them know that you have your own experiences that might relate, and it's coming from a good place, but it's knowing when to share that story and when not to. So when to share the story is when it is to the benefit of the person you're telling the story to, so that they can know that you're not alone. But sometimes it feels like you're comparing and it doesn't really make sense, and it's recognizing that and learning to step back and stand with somebody. There's, of course, also standing up. This one, for me, always feels a little complicated because you never want to step in front of somebody. So we did change the word to stand up. This is where you might be in a situation where you're seeing someone get picked on for something, and you want to support them or you want to protect them. You want to stand up for what's right in a situation where you feel safe to do so. So some of the things that we talked about when we were coming up with this presentation is also just asking somebody, hey, are you okay in this situation, before you insert yourself into the situation, unless, of course, it's getting really unsafe. But also, it can happen in many different ways. So one of the examples I was thinking of is one time at a bar, I saw a girl, and she was by herself, and there were people kind of all over her, and I just went up to her because I didn't know if she had other friends there, and I was like, I'm here with a group of girls, and if you need us, we can come support you. And she said, no, I'm okay. And all I needed to do was check with her in that situation. Now I'm going to say two contradictory statements. First of all, it's not about you, and that's the important part of allyship. So you're not appropriating someone else's experiences as your own. You're supporting them, and you're really recognizing, again, that emotional intelligence of where you intersect and where this is about them. But on another hand, it is all about you, in that it's upon you to look inside yourself, recognize your privilege. It's also not on somebody else to validate that you're a good person because you care about the issue. So it's, as much as you want to ask questions, you want to also do your research, learn where you fit into the different histories, and then when you're asking questions, it becomes a dialogue. So you're not putting the onus on somebody else to do the emotional labor for you, which is, hey, my experiences as this means so-and-so. It's about kind of finding that balance and creating the dialogue. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. So this is going to close down the webcast portion of our presentation. So everybody wave to our friends from, hi, thank you for joining us. Thank you for everybody in the room and out there in the world for joining the conversation. I'm going to say what I say to my teenage son when he won't put his phone down. Is that off, all the way off? Because we do want to make sure that we're moving it into an entirely confidential space. So can somebody give me a thumbs up that the webcast is officially over?